everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The Take. I just wanted to give everyone some context around why I'm doing this. We've recently ran a webinar and we left about 10 or 15 minutes for the end for a live Q&A, and we were inundated with questions and we kind of were like, ooh, gee whiz, okay, there's something to this. So that's why we're going to run these once a month on a Friday. So today's first episode is really just running through what's happening in the market, and we do get a lot of questions from obviously organisations that are hiring, people that are looking for roles, and just people that are curious about what's actually happening in the jobs market. So for those who don't know me, my name is Donegan, and I'm one of the co-founders here at Samuels Donegan. So we're national today, so I think we've got people coming in from all states, definitely Melbourne, Brisbane and Sydney, and I think some others as well. So welcome to everybody. So today is going to be live, as I mentioned, with the opportunity to have the Q&A. I'm going to run through the market overview for about the first 10 to 15 minutes, but if everyone could just start popping questions in the chat now, that will then have them ready. So when we're done with the market overview, I can pop straight in and start answering those questions. So I'll try to get it as many as I can and pick out the ones where I can see obviously there's some commonality and some themes coming through. So if everyone could just pop those in the chat, that'd be great. As I said, it's just a 30-minute session today, so I'm just going to get started. So just really kind of to give you a bit of an overview of where things stand at the moment. It's been a really interesting year, and I can't believe it's nearly 7 weeks until the end of the year. It seems to have gone very fast, and it feels like we've just kicked off. But, you know, it's been much like the property market, the jobs market has pockets within pockets. So what we are finding is that the senior executive market, and when I'm talking about that senior executive market, I'm really talking anything from 2 to 250 as a fixed package, right up, and that can be up to 500, 600, etc. That real true sort of like senior executive CPO level GM of HR, that is still slow. So that's across the board, across the nation. That's reflected globally as well. Unfortunately, we've really had, I guess, you know, probably 2 years now of real kind of cost cutting, and a lot of roles have been removed from structures. So that means that we end up in a situation of, you know, too much supply of people and not enough roles to go around. Now, what I would say is that we are probably hitting the bottom of that cycle. So I'd imagine that probably in the next 3 to 6 months, and particularly going into the new year, we're probably going to see that get a little bit better, because people essentially, or organisations, I should say, you can only go so long for being that lean. And I think everyone would probably agree that most functions are running really leanly at the moment. So that's what's happening at the executive end. In terms of the mid-levels, and we're sort of talking around that sort of, you know, 1 to 160 inclusive of super, that's hugely in demand. So if you're looking to hire at that level, that is a absolute in-demand level. So what we're seeing is those really kind of, you know, broad business partners, the generalists, etc. One theme that keeps coming through again and again and again is strong employment relations and workplace relations knowledge. So if you are at the start of your career or even towards the end of your career, it is an absolutely critical skill set to obtain. We are clearly in a different landscape in terms of legislation. That's not going to change federally or state anytime soon. So everyone just get comfortable. I think the other thing to point out is, you know, HR, it's a challenging market for a variety of reasons. And when I talk about the market, I'm talking about the economy more broadly. If you look at what is happening globally, what's happening geopolitically, all those macroeconomic factors, they all have an impact on the jobs market. And look, everyone feels it, right? From seeing that things are changing on a day-to-day basis, how we interact with the world, how we interact with each other, and how AI is changing things. I think there's a couple of things to point out. One, change is absolutely the new normal. Get used to it, right? That's just going to be something that's going to be around, right? And that might be changing systems, changing structures, change in norms. That's pretty standard. We're also going through a generational shift, and that's becoming very, very obvious. So you see it, how it's playing out in organisations where you've got your, you know, baby boomers who are essentially, you know, still potentially in charge in organisations. They will have an exit date. That is actually naturally going to happen. If anyone was paying attention to what was happening in the New York mayoral race, you will see that there is new generations coming through, the millennials, the Zs. They're going to have a very, very different approach. So expect to see some real changes in the workforce dynamics, probably in the next, I reckon, 3 to 5 years. So just going back to that point, I think, the role of HR is also changing. That's probably both a negative and a positive, if that makes sense. I think what we've seen from the last 5 years, if you think about 5 years ago, we were in the depths of COVID, HR very much got invited into the fold because it was a people issue. So, HR was invited to really kind of sit at that table. Now, the great thing is HR's at the table, but unfortunately its remit has been expanded, not necessarily given the extra resources and money to expand that remit, but they've got it nevertheless. Now, partly that is to do with things like the changes in workplace relations. So we all know, for example, with the new laws around things like, wage compliance, that's become an absolute massive issue. So there are a lot of organisations that are highly concerned that they may potentially be prosecuted for, underpayments, not willingly doing it, but still not having the right systems in place. So there's a huge amount of pay remediation work going on at the moment, and I'm probably sure most of you are nodding along going, yeah, I've had to do that. So that's a huge thing. And what also we're seeing is obviously the psychosocial aspect, which is huge. And what both of those things are doing and basically are contributing to is a change in HR's remit. And I can't even, think of the numerous conversations I've had with senior leaders around them finding that suddenly their remit is including safety and payroll. Now, they're probably the two areas that HR dislikes the most. Unfortunately, that is a reality. HR's remit is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the reason those areas are coming in is because there is so much scrutiny over it. So if you think about what's happening right now, we're in a world of compliance. Right? So HR is dealing with risk, it's dealing with governance, it's literally dealing with risk mitigation from a workplace relations perspective and also from a psychosocial safety perspective, respect at work, all of those things. So again, we're just in that cycle, and everything has a cycle. Economies, politics, everything has cycles. Where we're sitting right now is that HR has really had to lean into that because organisations are looking at, say, their profitability. Clearly, directors obviously get, very concerned when they potentially have liability in regards to things like wage compliance and psychosocial safety laws. Safety is now, it's a completely different ballgame. So we're seeing investment in that space. And what I would say is if you're at that executive level and you're looking for your next executive role, I would absolutely be leaning into the safety side of things, because it's the people that have that combined skill set that are really the front runners at the moment. And just on skills, again, to build for everybody, really, this is regardless of whether you work in HR, this is what everyone really needs to have. Data fluency and commercial acumen, they are two critical skills. They're learnable. They are not things that you need to go to university for. You can pick it up in your day-to-day. And I would say this across all levels. We need to get comfortable with AI, right? What I would also say about AI is that, it's been around for 3 years now. I don't think it's suddenly going to take everyone's job tomorrow. Sure, that might be the future, but the reality is at the moment, you just need to get comfortable, learn Copilot, like literally just pick up those things that are going to be able to supercharge either your team's performance or your own individual performance. So that's just something I would comment on that side of things. In terms of what else is happening at the moment, I think, timing's a really interesting thing rather for this time of year. So if you are in that bucket of hiring at the moment, we're 7 weeks into the end of the year. And what I would say is that January generally is a month that most people tend to take off. So it's summer, it's school holidays. So we've got organisations that are suddenly, working with us, and it's suddenly dawning on them that if they don't get their offers out in the next week to two, given most people have to have a 4-week notice period, they're suddenly going, oh my goodness, they're not going to be able to start before the end of the year. So, I would just say if you're hiring, be really mindful of that. And if you are also job hunting, a lot of people tend to think that, oh, well, the market quietens down, in December. It doesn't. It actually gets busier. What I would say is it's always quiet in January, but the reality is the market actually goes crazy. This is always a very, very busy quarter for us. It's probably the busiest quarter because what tends to happen, job seekers generally get to the point where they're kind of like, you know what, I really want to have the summer off. I think I'm going to quit and I'll have Christmas and I'll look for a job in the new year. So what that generally means is organisations then start going, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to hire someone before Christmas. I'll just get a contractor to come in, etc. Or we'll review the role in the new year. And because of that big break, generally it's the 1st of February until the market opens again. So that's just something to be really aware of in terms of either being a job seeker or if you are doing some hiring at the moment. So that's just to kind of get a little bit of give a bit of an overview from that perspective. What I'd also say, and that we're also seeing, is things like, I feel like the 90s is back again. Decentralization is happening. I've spoken to a number of organisations recently where they are actually moving their functions either offshore or they're decentralising them. Now, that always comes when you're in a business cycle of organisations trying to manage their bottom line, shall we say. So that is, look, moving to lower cost models, nothing new, but we definitely are seeing a little bit more of this. And I would say it's really happening in those larger organisations. No surprises. We see it across the news. We see what's happening in the sectors. What's really interesting is that we're in a privileged position. Being recruiters, we have an absolute window into the market. So we recruit from here to there across every sector and every level and in every state. So we can get a really good touch point of what is actually happening. What you'll often find is, economic indicators like, the unemployment rate, things like that, they're real lag indicators, right? So they'll suddenly start showing, oh, gee, the job market's not as strong. Well, no kidding. We know that it's been like that for probably 6 to 12 months, but the data often comes through too late to really be effective. So I would suggest always tapping into like a qualified recruiter that knows what they're talking about, because you might have hired 2 years ago and you're thinking that, oh, well, it's really easy to hire those people. Guess what? It might not be. Do you know what I mean? So the skills that are really in demand at the moment, workplace relations and also remuneration, those skill sets are incredibly rare and they're putting a premium on them. Now, the amount of people that sit in those talent pools, probably less than 5% for both. So it's just really actually speaking to those knowledgeable, individuals, if that makes sense. And given that we do get a really early window into the trends, we can see what's happening and we can see where the demand is coming, where it's tightening up, what levels, etc. And what we are seeing at the moment is really, I think what's interesting is how it's playing out in terms of the sectors. Now, sectors and size of organisation are a really interesting concept. So again, to the point of us being able to see the trends way ahead of time, I would say probably 10 years ago, we could see that the writing was on the wall that healthcare was going to be an absolute booming sector. So healthcare and higher education. And I would say right now, healthcare is your number one growth sector. If you have children that are looking to study something at the moment, I would highly suggest something in the care economy, because that is something, and again, to the point of, stepping back and looking at the sectors that are doing really well at the moment and are really sustainable. It's sectors that can't be outsourced. It's sectors that can't be offshored and are growing. So if you think of things like healthcare, right, the care economy, that's hospitals, healthcare, disability services, retirement living, could be hospitals. It's, huge. We're talking, pretty much 15% of the economy at the moment is taken up by caring roles. Now, what that means is, it's capital intensive, they need a lot of people, and which means they need HR as well because it's complex. So again, things like infrastructure, energy, all those sectors, transport, logistics, they're all doing very, very well, partly because A, they're essential, but B, they can't be offshored. We can't suddenly, have homes built offshore. They need to be done here. So the sectors that are going through that transition and probably are a little bit more challenged, partly they're larger organisations. So if you think about financial services, we'll pick on those guys, for example, the banks. When you're a business of 50,000 people, it is incredibly difficult to navigate change. You've probably got legacy systems that you're operating with from maybe 10 to 15 years ago. So it makes that shift and change very, very difficult. And also, you're probably going to be implementing tech and AI in huge numbers. So that's going to affect your workforce, which is exactly what's happening at the moment. So those sectors that are getting a bit challenged at the moment are really, it's banking, it's the insurance sector. It's a real shift to probably what we would have seen maybe 15, 20 years ago when those sectors would have been, predominantly the main hirers. So the industries are constantly shifting in terms of what's going. And what I would also say is that growth within that small to medium enterprise is really the engine room of the economy. And what I mean by small to medium is that 500 to 5,000. Usually about 1,000 is about the sweet spot, but that's where we're seeing the growth come from at the moment. So I often say to people, particularly at the executive level, you might find that your next role comes in an organisation that you've never heard of, or an industry you've never heard of as well. So I'm going to wrap the market update there because we probably need the last 15 minutes to go into some questions. So I'm just going to have a little look in terms of what's coming through. And so someone's asked about prof services. So in terms of, prof services is probably having a little bit of a tougher time at the moment, and obviously, if that makes sense, if we think about sort of what's happening in their remit, it's a little bit similar to the financial services sector. Obviously there's the government kind of scandals and bits and pieces, but the thing is the whole business model of professional services is shifting and changing. And again, if you're a big behemoth with 150,000 people, again, you're not going to respond to change, as quickly as you can. And what you will find is organisations that are smaller and more agile will be able to respond to things quicker if they don't have the bureaucracy, if they don't have the layers and the complexity. You just are able to respond to things just so much quicker, if that makes sense. So just wanted to touch on that. So just if people want to pop in their questions, that would be great. Someone's asking, where are you seeing, okay, there's a Brisbane question. So, Brisbane, obviously Queensland and New South Wales, all the states, you all have different remits, if that makes sense, in terms of industry. So here in Victoria, we're very heavy on construction, manufacturing, used to be, etc. Queensland's a little bit different. It's obviously a resource-rich state. So if you're thinking about WA and also Queensland sit in a similar space. Queensland, you're very fortunate because you've got the Olympics coming, so infrastructure is huge. So we're seeing a lot of growth come through in that space. And also, resources is an interesting sector at the moment. It's definitely being a little bit challenged. And what I mean by that is, the mining, traditional kind of mining companies and the mining services, they've literally, made rivers of cash, if that makes sense. What the challenges are now for them is that you've got export issues with the tariffs. So, for example, Australia sends a lot of our iron ore, etc., over to China. They make the steel, which sells to the US. That obviously is going to have a massive impact in terms of what that looks like. China is also not so interested in our, or shall we say, more interested in green energy, if that makes sense. And so that is like green iron ore. So that's a completely different manufacturing process, that's used, and that's really, really expensive. And it's a complete shift in the business model. So resources is, whilst, that's been a big export for us and has brought in a lot of cash, it is definitely going through probably a little bit of a bit of right sizing at the moment. It's still going to be a massive sector, but I think it's just certainly got its challenges, which is a little bit unusual because that sector has always been known to be pretty, shall we say, wealthy and doing pretty well. So those guys are probably just going through a slightly different shift in their business cycle at the moment. Someone's got, someone's mentioned about AI not being scary, leaning into it. Sorry, just jumping up here so I can see what people have got. Can you shed some more light on how HR can treat AI as something that's not here to take HR jobs, especially recruitment? Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say is, I think people go through like that cycle of, when AI first came out, I think we all thought, oh my God, it's going to take my job. I think when you've got time to step back and actually assess what's going on and what it actually means is get curious. People will have noticed, and particularly if you've been a candidate, even if you've been hiring, you will know that it's an absolute nightmare. And candidate experience seemingly has gone out the window. I never thought we'd end up in a situation where it was okay not to respond to candidates, but unfortunately what's happening is we're seeing, huge volumes being received by the TA teams, and they're telling us, they're like, we've got 300 to 400 applicants. We're not even bothering to screen them because they're just coming through so fast. Now, that's not helpful. Equally for candidates who are then applying for a role and getting an automatic rejection, that's not really helpful either. So I think, and it's a shame because unfortunately TA is often seen as a binary. They're kind of like, oh, well, we're not hiring, so we don't need a TA team. Now, okay, fine, I understand that. But the reality is a lot of TA teams are very, very lean at the moment, and they're dealing with huge amounts of volume. A lot of organisations have gone straight to, oh, we're not hiring, so we'll just get AI to do that. And I often say to people, the reality is right now, if you're a job seeker, you will probably find that your resume is not being looked at by a human, it's getting reviewed by a bot, right? So you've got to then think about, okay, all of those sorts of things. And what I would say is, I think we all dial into tech and think it's going to be the solution to the problem, but the reality is, people and technology are complex, right? So all I would say is upskill. We're in this environment where you need to be able to unlearn things and you need to be able to learn things. So that's a critical skill that I think everyone needs to kind of be across. Can you comment on the geopolitical impacts you see for Australian HR functions with global parent organisations? Yeah, that's a really good question, and very interesting. I think that's really challenging because we're in a world of deglobalisation. The reality is, we're not friends with our neighbours. It's like, okay, do we like the US today? Do we like China? Like, what's going on? I've seen a lot of globals actually just de-risk and just go, you know what? I'm actually just not even going to enter going into these territories. We're just going to just leave that. So I think the challenge for Australian operations here is that if you are belonging to a US parent, you're probably finding that you need to toe the line, with what they're saying. So if DEI is off the radar, you'll find that DEI is off the radar here. So, it is challenging. And I'd say, 20 years ago, people would have loved to work for a global. These days, it's pretty low on people's agenda. They want to work in Australia and they want to have those Australian leadership teams that have the same sort of, same cultural norms that we have, if that makes sense, or maybe just sticking to Asia Pac. Again, things are constantly changing. I never thought that I'd be having this conversation, but it just goes to show that things do consistently change. Okay, how do you navigate your first leadership role in HR, especially if you haven't managed people formally on paper? Great question. It's the classic, how do I get the job when I haven't got the experience, when I need the experience? Look, you can have informal people leadership, and that's how I kind of worked it through my career. And it was really, I think some people are natural leaders. They will always be the person that trains the new people or is the go-to person from that side of things. I think that's naturally a really great way to, take on projects or be that lead, etc. And then really it can be, potentially a step-up opportunity when someone goes away, etc. And I think, one of the things that I recommend to people is the best thing to do is step out of HR and step into operations, step into the business and actually say, hey, can I go and manage a service line? Can I go and manage those people? Because honestly, that will give you the absolute credibility with the business, because the difference is all of a sudden you're not just, doing the HR job, which is often about, policy and compliance and, capability uplift. You're actually seeing what the business has to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And guess what? They've probably got a million other things that they're doing. People is probably the last thing on their agenda. And it really gives you an understanding of the challenges of what they're dealing with and then the realities of, why things don't always go to plan. So I think that's also another great way to be able to just, pick up some of that people leadership. You could be all of a sudden, managing 30 people, so there's just, that's a great way to pick up that leadership. We've got someone, okay. I've had a few candidates ask if ER will continue to be in such high demand. Unfortunately, yes, I don't see that going anywhere. And if you think about it, the world is complex right now. There is so much going on. There's so much uncertainty. What I think unfortunately has happened now is that predictability is extremely low. We used to be able to say, 5-year plan for your business, set it and forget it. Now, these days, things shift and change every 3 to 6 months. One thing is that is absolutely certain is that employees are feeling unsure. They're feeling unsure about their place in an organisation, and that is leading to, uncertainty. We know that, with ChatGPT, everyone thinks that they're a lawyer. So the amount of cases that have gone to Fair Work, I think, is something like a record. I think there's been just under 50,000 that have gone through this year. Now, 2/3 of those are getting booted out. But what that means is a hell of a lot more work for HR. So ER, not going anywhere anytime. So unfortunately, here we go. What do you think? What do you think is the impact of cost optimization and AI impact on entry-level tasks on early careers opportunities? Really good question. And we've explored this, and we've kind of we thought we had the answer, and we were like, yep, absolutely. It's going to, they're all going to get offshore. They're all going to disappear. But interestingly enough, there still seems to be demand. Don't get me wrong. I think it absolutely is going to impact some of those entry-level roles, and that is a concern, absolutely. I think it's going to shift and change. So if you think about it, the first entry-level role into HR, for example, often a coordinator, it might be a tier 1 advisory. For years, that's pretty much been either offshored or automated, because most places it's just a hello inbox, etc. Now, automation is, going to help in that regard, if that makes sense. So that's going to make everyone's life easier. I don't think any of us in HR or recruitment are going to be unhappy that there's less admin to do. So I think there's definitely that. I think it's going to change the scale of what those entry-level roles look like. And one thing that I guess I'm really passionate about is making sure that organisations and also industry and universities are actually making sure that they're sending out graduates that are actually going to meet what the market needs. That's kind of a bit of a bugbear of mine, because I often find that you come out of uni and you're ready to be strategic, and then all of a sudden you find that you're doing the filings. So I think there's got to be that closer cohort around or that cohesion rather around what that's going to look like in terms of the future. I think we're getting close to time. So look, I hope this has been beneficial in terms of running this. Obviously, we're going to have another episode. We're doing them on a monthly basis. So the next one will be Friday, the 12th of December. Follow us on LinkedIn. So Samuel's Donegan, and also you can follow myself. I'm always popping stuff up there. So would love to get some feedback on whether this is relevant, what you'd like me to cover off or not cover off. So if I think I've there's another one coming through. I'll just answer it quickly. What does an HR function needs to prepare to support people generally in the coming 2 to 3 years? Super quick. I think workforce planning, it's not sexy, but it's something everyone's going to have to delve into, and probably really capability assessment is going to be huge as well. And that means, assessing what skills we're going to need in the future, and then really mapping that to your current organisation, and do your current people have the skills to either, make the leap and make the shift, or essentially are you going to have to rescope and rehire? So I think lots of work's going to have to be done there. So I'm going to have to wrap up now, because I'm pretty sure we're coming to the end. So again, thanks so much for attending. Hope it was helpful, and hopefully see you on next time's episode. Thanks, everyone.